from, and just making a decision, because right now is the time. Now is the time to make a decision. I really believe that that there are certain times when, yes, God is always speaking. Yes, God is always calling people, but there are certain times when God calls a lot of people at one time for certain things, and this is one of those times. You'll hear a lot of people talk about a great time of harvest, that the harvest is ripe, but also that God is calling. First, God is calling those back who have gone astray, gone away. However you want to put that, God is calling the prodigals back. We've talked about that before. But there's an urgency to it, and that day is today. And so we're going to look at that a little bit about, we're going to come from Hebrews 4 and also from Joel 3. So let's look at some of those things, and we'll take some points from that too. So Hebrews 4 is something that I just keep coming back to this chapter pretty much every day now, reading and stuff. So we'll look at verse 1. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still holds and is offered today. Now, it starts off with chapter 3. Just to give a little context. Chapter 3 is talking about how Israel did not enter God's rest. So it's talking about us entering his rest. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still holds and is offered today, let us be afraid to distrust it, and lest any of you should think that he has come too late and has come too short of reaching it. For indeed we have the glad tidings of the gospel of God proclaimed to us just truly as they did, the Israelites of old did, when the good news delivered from the bondage, when of deliverance from bondage came to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them because it was not mixed with faith, with the leaning of the entire personality on God in absolute trust and confidence in his power, wisdom, and goodness by those who heard it. Okay, so as you can hear, I am definitely reading from the Amplified here, but it says it didn't profit them because they didn't mix it with faith. So whenever you hear something, whenever you hear about God's rest, whenever you hear God calling to you, you have to mix your faith with it. And if you don't have, like, you can hear a message, you can hear a message, but if you don't mix your faith in with it, it's just words. It's just something you're hearing. If you're going to church every Sunday and you're just listening to something and you're not actually mixing your faith in with the word that's being spoken, with the word that you're reading in the Bible, it's not going to profit you. Okay. Let's skip ahead a little bit to verse 6. Seeing then that the promise remains over from the past times for some to enter that rest, and those who formerly were given the good news about it and the opportunity failed to appropriate it and did not enter because of disobedience. So not having faith is also, not having faith and disobedience are very, very, very related. Because if you don't have faith in what God says, you're not going to do it. If you don't believe him, if you don't believe what he says, if you don't put it in your inmost being and live out of it, you're not going to obey it. And that's something that we'll talk a little bit about next week whenever we talk about, what to do whenever you get a word. Excuse me. Sorry, my thing was messing up there. So next week we're going to talk a little about what to do with the words you're given. But this week we're going to continue in this. This mention of rest was not a reference to their own entering into Canaan, for if Joshua had given them rest, he would not speak afterward about another day. Oh, excuse me, I skipped a whole verse here, the one that I have highlighted, the one that I wanted to mention the most. Again, he sets a definite day, a new today, and gives another opportunity of securing that rest, saying through David after so long a time in the words already quoted, "Today, if you would hear his voice, and when you hear it, do not harden your hearts." This mention of a rest was not a reference to their entering into Canaan, for if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken afterward about another day. So then, there is still awaiting a full and complete Sabbath rest reserved for the true people of God. For For he who was once entered into God's rest has ceased from the weariness of pain of human labors, just as God rested from those labors, peculiarly his own. Let us therefore be zealous and exert ourselves and strive diligently to enter that rest of God, to know and experience it for ourselves, that no one may fall or perish by the same kind of unbelief and disobedience into which those of the wilderness fell. So, let's talk about this for just a second here. Whenever it talks about verse 7, he sets a definite day today and gives another opportunity of securing the rest, saying through David after such a long time, in the words already quoted, today, if you would hear his voice, and when you hear it, do not harden your hearts. So the reason they didn't enter is because the reason they didn't enter rest, now they entered Canaan, but they didn't enter rest in their hearts. They didn't enter the rest of God, which is still available to us, and that's what it's talking about here. It's still available to us, but we have to believe him. We have to set it in our hearts to begin with, to believe God, and then we can enter that rest. Minimize this. Thank you. Okay, then we can enter that rest because we mix the word that we hear with faith, and we experience this for ourselves, so that no one may fall or perish by the same kind of unbelief and disobedience into those in the wilderness fell. So if you guys remember, God did so many things for them. God did so many things for the Israelites. And each time their hearts just weren't right. To put it shortly, their hearts weren't right. And they, despite all the things, despite the manna, they still complained. Despite, God parting the sea, they still didn't believe that he could bring them through the wilderness. So they didn't get to enter it. And, so it's the same with us, that whenever we have a marker with God, whenever God brings us through something in our lives, whenever God just speaks to us in any way, that can be a marker in our hearts for us to believe him, for us to anchor our faith. We need to anchor our faith in him, and it's the little breadcrumbs along the way that remind us of who he is and that he is there in our lives. But we have to purpose in our hearts that we will believe. And I wrote in my notes here that they were full of wilderness. I mean, they were full of anxiety in the wilderness. They were full of worry. They were full of doubt because they lacked faith, and because they didn't believe God in such a way that they lived their life to where everything that God brought them through was just another opportunity to see him move. And that's how we need to live our lives. Because, as we'll look at in Joel 3, I gave this verse to a friend of mine a long time ago, and I really believe that. Now I don't know how to say this properly, but I understand the verse, okay. But right now is what I'm saying, that these words apply to now in this way, okay. That there's a lot of people who, whether they are about to enter a decision in order to continue in the life that they're living, or to move towards the life that God has called them to, or maybe they don't even know who God is at all right now, and that God is going to reveal himself to them. I really believe that God is going to reveal himself to a lot of people in the next amount of time. In the next, I don't know how long, but there is a period of time where God is going to reveal himself more and more to people, and they're going to have a decision to make. And this is what this is talking about for me and for you, and in this context. And that's why we have to, us who already believe in him, must put our faith in him and see the things that he is doing, because we can't live our lives. We're no longer going to be able to live our lives the way we've lived them the way the world has lived it the past 20 or 30 years, where we just kind of coast along. There's going to be there's a decision, there's a dividing line, there's that place of the lukewarm's not going to work anymore. It's been so easy for people to be lukewarm, but I really don't think that lukewarm is going to work anymore, because you're either going to have to be completely one way or completely the other. So let's start Joel 3:11. Hasten and come, all you nations, round about and assemble yourselves. Excuse me. Yeah, well, verse 11. There you, O Lord, will bring down your mighty ones and your warriors. Let the nations bestir themselves and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the nations round about. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get down and tread the grapes, for the winepress is full, the vats overflow, for the wickedness of the peoples is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. And this is really like, it's a verse, okay, but the words are about the harvest and about decision. So I really, like you hear people. Todd came to the church recently, and talking about the harvest, and I really believe also that many people, that the harvest is ready, that the harvest is getting ready, that there's a time kind of like around the Jesus movement. Where things are coming to where people are going to come to the Lord in droves. But first, God is calling those back who have walked away, and that is the valley of decision that you and I and many others that we've known are in right now. That God is calling you, God is calling them, and He's calling us to have faith in Him. He's calling us to see the things that He is doing, and to believe Him, and to live in such a way that we know that He is going to carry us through every situation in our lives, and that He is the one that is there, that is guiding us, and that we need to listen. We need to mix our faith with the words that we hear, and we need to listen for His voice in order to guide us through the rest of our lives, because I really believe that He's going to show Himself more and more, and so I just want you guys to be looking for that. So you guys have a wonderful night. Next week we'll probably talk about, unless something changes, I plan on talking about what to do with your words whenever you get a prophetic word, or whenever God speaks to you, what to do with that, kind of the practical steps. Because I feel like sometimes people, get a word, or they, someone tells them something, they're like, oh yeah, that's great, that's awesome, and then they don't do anything with it. So we'll talk about some practical steps with that, because you guys know I love practicality. But